Today is October 26, 2024. I am +7 GMT. Sometime over last night, Israel carried out their strikes on Iran. As far as we can tell, as far as anyone is reporting, and that includes Western media, Israeli media, Iranian media, the strikes were very limited in nature. And I think this was to be expected. Unless Israel and the United States engage in large-scale war with Iran, they're going to have to carry out these much smaller scale attacks. They do not have the missile inventory to cause large-scale damage with these type of air-launched strikes. They simply don't have enough planes or enough missiles to do it. They certainly don't have the amount of air defense systems required to parry the retaliations that would soon follow if this was a serious attempt to inflict large-scale damage on Iran short of all-out war. So I'm going to talk about what we know about the strikes so far. Hasn't even been 24 hours since they were conducted. I will talk about why they were limited. I will talk about how even as these strikes were carried out, Israeli forces are struggling on the border with Lebanon, fighting against Hezbollah. This was according to Western media. And I will talk about all of the dangers that still persist across the rest of the region and for the rest of the world. So let's begin by looking at what was being said right before Israel carried out this strike. So this was from The Guardian, and this was October 23rd, 2024. Strike on Iran will make world understand Israel's might, says Defense Minister. Well, these strikes so far seem to have fallen far short of that. Planned airstrikes on Iran will make the world understand Israel's military might, the Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant has said. The Middle East has been braced for more than 3 weeks for a threatened Israeli response to Iran's October 1st missile attack, which was in turn a reprisal for Israel's killing of the Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah. Gallant visited air crews at Hatzarim Air Base and made clear that Israel still intended to strike back. In my conversations with them, I emphasized after we attack Iran, everyone will understand your might, the process of preparation and training. Any enemy that tries to harm the state of Israel will pay a heavy price, the minister said. The extent of Israel's target list has been the subject of protracted conversations between Israeli leaders and the Biden administration, which has urged them not to strike Iran's oil industry infrastructure or its nuclear program. Washington fears a cycle of escalation, particularly in the last 2 weeks before the U.S. presidential election. Of course, everything Israel does is facilitated, made possible by the United States. Without constant U.S. support, Israel would not be able to conduct any of its military operations, let alone all of its military operations that it is conducting against Yemen, Gaza, Syria, Lebanon, and Iran. Now, the problem for Israel is not actually a stomach, an appetite for escalation. They have an appetite for escalation. The United States, ultimately Israel's sponsor in the region, Israel being a U.S. proxy, wants war with Iran. The problem is the desire for war, the desire to wage war against Iran is far greater than America's means to actually fight and win that war. The problem Israel has is that even though it has developed tremendous military capabilities for a nation its size, it is simply an extension of the collective West and the collective West military industrial capacity. As a matter of fact, many of its missile systems are developed jointly with the U.S., manufactured jointly with the United States. And so if the United States is having a hard time producing large numbers of long-range strike weapons, so is Israel. Israel does not have an overabundance of these weapons that they can use to carry out wave after wave of strikes against Iran. Now, there's something I want to point out that I would hope people understood. Israel and Iran are separated by quite a distance, over 1,000 kilometers between the closest point of Iran to Israel. Now, for Iran, this works out well, because if it has weapons that reach far beyond 1,000 kilometers, Israel being such a small state, everything is in range of Iranian missiles. However, for Israel, if they had missiles that had a 1,000 kilometer range, they would only be able to reach targets along the border, which is why they need either longer range missiles that can go twice that distance to hit most targets in Iran, not all, but most targets in Iran, or they need air-launched weapons where they'll fly over Jordanian, Iraqi, Saudi, Syrian airspace to reach Iran. And even then, they still have to fire these missiles quite a distance. And their warplanes need to avoid Iranian airspace altogether, because this is not Afghanistan, this is not Iraq. The days of the collective West and their proxies flying uninhibited over another nation and dropping bombs at will, those days are over. Modern air defense systems make that almost impossible. So what Israel has to do is carry out standoff strikes. And that is what it appears Israel did in this most latest strike, and the strike they carried out in April earlier this year. After they struck an Iranian consulate building in Syria and Iran retaliated for that, they carried out a long-range missile strike on Iran itself. This article from the Financial Times, this is actually back from April 19, 2024, military briefing, the Israeli missiles used to strike Iran. So they're looking at photographed wreckage of the booster section of one of these Israeli missiles. This is what Israel's using. This is a highly specialized missile. These missiles are likely only having been produced over maybe the last 10 to 15 years. There's likely not large numbers of these missiles, not large enough to do the sort of damage I think people envision Israel doing to Iran with these type of strikes. And this is what the Financial Times says. Israel may have used an air-launched Sparrow ballistic missile to demonstrate to Tehran that it can successfully attack targets inside the country. One Israeli official also indicated that the country's armed forces used a standoff missile attack launched far from Iran's borders. So standoff strikes. They will not enter Iranian airspace. They're going to fire these as far away from Iran as possible. Israel has informed its partners that the primary attack vectors were airborne with no entry into Iranian airspace, the official said. And they're talking about the Israeli Blue Sparrow missiles, actually a family of Sparrow missiles. And they were originally developed as test targets for anti-ballistic missile systems. Sparrow family of air-launched missiles have a range of up to 2,000 kilometers. So twice the distance between Israel and the closest part of Iran's border, and could have been fired by Israeli fighter jets refueled by tanker planes in Syrian airspace, according to open source intelligence analysts citing air flight data. We'll always be careful of open source intelligence. Buttressing that theory, Syria's Sana State news agency reported that Israeli missiles had targeted air defense positions in its southern region. Such a move would fit with Israel's clearing the air corridor in Syria for a standoff strike on Iran. Or it could have just been Israel trying to convince everyone they went into contested Syrian airspace when they may have actually crossed Jordanian airspace and then perhaps into de facto U.S.-controlled Iraqi airspace. It is a fact that Israel was allowed use of Jordanian airspace to intercept Iranian missiles back earlier this year in April. Opening a safe air raid corridor in Syria would in turn enable long-range attacks by Israeli fighter jets well outside Iranian airspace. As the Israeli missiles then flew east over Iraq, they would have jettisoned their fuel booster units with the armed sections carrying on to their targets in Iran. So even by overflowing Turkey, Iraq, Syria, Jordan, or Saudi Arabia, Israel would still have to use long-range air-launched missiles to hit ground targets in Iran. They cannot fly over Iranian airspace out of fear of being targeted by Iran's air defenses. And the logic would go that if that's the case for Iran, crossing Syrian airspace, even if they cleared these corridors, that still would not be safe. So I think that was a diversion, and I think they went into airspace essentially controlled by the US in Iraq. Now, what is the problem here? These are sophisticated long-range missiles. They likely do not exist in large numbers. We already have seen with the conflict in Ukraine the limits of Western military industrial production, which includes Israel. Israel is part of the collective West, and it suffers from the same limits to its military industrial capacity. I've talked about this many times in the past. This is an article from the Defense Post. This is about the US Air Force ordering a ramp up of JSOMs and LRASM air-launched missiles. So these are long-range standoff weapons that the US have them in relatively large numbers. And this particular article, the link will be in the video description, talks about doubling the number of JSOMs and LRASMs collectively to 1,000 a year. They're talking about doubling it, which means that right now they're making 500 missiles a year, which sounds like a lot of missiles. It really does. But you have to remember that to put all of this in perspective, let's look at how many long-range precision-guided missiles Russia is launching into Ukraine every single year, and the fact that this conflict in Ukraine continues nonetheless. So we have this article from Reuters. Ukraine says Russia has launched over 8,000 missiles, 4,630 drones during war. This was February 2024, the beginning of this year. 4,000 missiles a year. So compare that to the 500 JSOMs that the US is producing and the 1,000 they would like to produce in a few years from now. And think about Israel, much smaller. How many long-range missiles do you think they're making every year? And what impact is that going to have on a nation the size of Iran? And speaking of the size of Iran, just to give you an idea, this is a very useful website. And it's comparing two nations that you type in. I typed in Ukraine and Iran, and it shows the two countries imposed over one another. So you can see how big they are, and you can see how much larger Iran is. Ukraine is 2.7 times smaller than Iran. This is not a perfect way to analyze this, but it gives you a basic grasp on the scale that we're talking about. So the idea that Israel is going to devastate Iran, even with wave after wave of missile attacks, is absurd. It cannot. The US cannot. It would require large-scale war and the justification of using extreme tactics and strategies and even extreme forms of weaponry to create the devastation I think the US and Israel would like to inflict on Iran. We're talking up to and including nuclear weapons. Let us continue. There's this BBC article here talking about the previous missile attack and this leaked assessment, US assessment of the Israeli attack before it took place from the BBC. This was 4 days ago. What leaked US assessment of Israeli plans to strike Iran shows. This is what the article says. Taken together, the two documents, these were leaked documents, are a classified US assessment of Israel's preparations to hit targets in Iran based on intelligence analyzed on 15th to 16th October by the US National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. What features prominently is the mention of two air-launched ballistic missile systems, Golden Horizon and ROX. These are relatively newer missiles that would not have been produced in huge numbers. ROX is a long-range missile system made by the Israeli company Rafael and designed to hit a variety of targets both above and below ground. Golden Horizon is thought to refer to the Blue Sparrow missile system with a range of around 2,000 kilometers. We already talked about that one. The significance of this is that it would indicate that the Israeli Air Force is planning to carry out a similar but greatly expanded version of its attack on an Iranian radar site near Isfahan in April. So if you doubled or quadrupled an attack that only targeted one site in Iran, that would still be an extremely small strike. And this is the problem Israel has because of its proximity to Iran. 1,000 kilometers between them, and the only way of them attacking are these air-launched missiles that they don't have huge numbers of. And then the fact that Iran actually does have huge numbers of ballistic missiles they can fire back at Israel in retaliation, and also U.S. bases across the region, which the U.S. has no defenses against, really. This creates a huge problem for the U.S. and its Israeli proxies. They're trying to escalate toward a war that they can justify using weapons and tactics that might give them an edge over Iran. But again, as each year passes by, Iran gets stronger, U.S. power and the power of its proxies continues to fade relative to the expanding multipolar world, which Iran is a part of. I have referred to this document many times. This was from back in 2009, Which Path to Persia? Options for a New American Strategy Toward Iran. And in this paper, and let's go to the table of contents again and just look at some of the options that they talked about. They refer to the nuclear deal with Iran, and they talked about how they were going to use that basically to entrap Iran. They were going to accuse Iran of violating it, and then they were going to use the alleged violation of the nuclear deal as justification for greater pressure, sanctions, even military options. They talk about the military operations, a full-scale U.S. invasion, airstrikes on Iran's nuclear sites, and of course this one, Chapter 5, Leave It to Bibi, allowing or encouraging an Israeli military strike, which is what we see Israel struggling with right now. The desire to do this, but the reality inhibiting them from carrying out a large-scale strike that is actually going to make a difference. In this 2009 paper, they admitted there were severe limits to the Israeli military, even to U.S. military power, in carrying out this kind of strike. They also talked about the limits to actually invading Iran, noting that it is a much larger country than Iraq or, say, Afghanistan, both in terms of geographic land area, but also the size of the population, and the Iranian military was not going to be as easy as Afghanistan or Iraq. They also talk about sanctions. They talk about regime change operations, funding and organizing mobs to overthrow the government. They talk about insurgency, minority and opposition groups, including listed terrorist organizations, listed by the U.S. as terrorist organizations, giving them support to help destabilize and overthrow the Iranian government. So they have been using variations of all of these options even before this paper was published, but ever since this paper was published, they have used every combination of these options available. We see them now resorting to these most extreme options, the military options. And we could see how the nuclear plan deal, that did not work. Sanctions did not work. We remember multiple attempts to overthrow the Iranian government with street protests. That did not work. And now we see Israel carrying out these strikes against Iran, trying to provoke a wider war. Iran displaying not just maximum restraint, but they're also demonstrating significant deterrence in the process. And all of this demonstrates how difficult it has become for the U.S. to maintain primacy over the Middle East, and in a wider sense over the rest of the planet. Now, let's talk about the strikes themselves. So we looked at what Israel did in its previous strike back in April. We're looking at Israeli military capabilities. They have several hundred modern warplanes, well-trained Air Force, refueling capabilities. They have these long-range missiles, but they don't have unlimited numbers of them, and in fact not nearly enough to carry out the type of strike they would need to cause significant damage in Iran. They could have attacked nuclear facilities and oil facilities. They could have caused significant damage to civilian infrastructure, but that would have incurred a much more significant Iranian retaliation, which I think at this point there's hesitation to do that at the moment. So let's see what the Western media said about this. We'll go with the BBC. All of the Western media is reporting the same. And as you will see, between Western media, Israeli media, Iranian media, there are some common denominators as well, something close to the truth, perhaps. Explosions in Iran as Israel launches airstrikes. Israel launched multiple airstrikes on Iran in the early hours of Saturday in response to what the Israeli military called months of continuous attacks from Tehran and its proxies. The Israeli Defense Forces say it's carrying out precise strikes on military targets in Iran, which it accuses of relentlessly attacking Israel since October 7th, 2023. Well, we know that is a lie because even the US government itself said there was no evidence. Iran knew about the October 7th, 2023 Hamas attacks and had no role in them. So what is Israel saying when they tried to link Iran to this attack that Iran admittedly had no role in? The IDF's confirmation of strikes on Iran follow early reports by Iranian state media of several explosions in and around the capital of Tehran. It comes after Tehran launched almost 200 ballistic missiles towards Israel on October 1st in what the country said was retaliation for the killing of Hamas political leader on Iranian soil back in July. In a statement announcing that the operation in Iran was underway, the Israeli military spokesman Daniel Hagari said Israel had the right and duty to respond and its defensive and offensive capabilities were fully mobilized. The US and one of Israel's closest allies said Saturday's strikes against Israel was an exercise in self-defense. Strikes against Israel. I think they meant against Iran. Again, we have to zoom out and see the big picture. The problem right now with Israel in the Middle East is that it is in violation of international laws, occupying territory that the UN itself says is not Israeli. It's illegally occupying territory, Palestinian territory, Syrian territory. It has taken territory in previous wars that it was supposed to give back, and it has not. As long as you're occupying someone else's territory, other people have a right to take up arms and resist foreign occupation. That is international law. Israel is trying to use the Hamas attacks last October last year as a pretext for fighting everyone else in the Middle East, Yemen, Lebanon, Syria, Iran, but these countries had nothing to do with Hamas. Hamas's biggest sponsor is Qatar, a very close US ally in the region. Israeli media admits that the current Israeli government, headed by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, deliberately sought to maneuver Hamas into power to prevent a two-state solution from ever materializing. An organization that has carried out an attack that is backed by a close U.S. ally in the region and an organization that the Israeli government itself wanted in power, they're using its actions to justify attacking nations and organizations that really have nothing to do with Hamas at all. And even though Iran and Hezbollah support the Palestinian right to defend themselves, that does not necessarily translate to material support for Hamas itself, and no material support has been demonstrated. I've seen no evidence of it, not from the US government, not from the Israeli government, and again, even according to the US government following October 7, 2023, Iran was not found to have any knowledge or role in the attacks. Now let's look at this other BBC article. Strikes on Iran suggest Israel may have heeded US warnings. And this article is talking all about how small the Israeli attack was, how limited it seemed. So let's read a little bit from this. Iranian state media has confirmed that explosions have been heard in the west of Tehran, but there's no clarity as yet in precisely what the targets have been and whether they have been successfully hit by Israel. News sites close to the Iranian Revolutionary Guard say that some military bases in the west and southwest of the Iranian capital have been targeted. The Syrian state news agency says that Israeli airstrikes have also targeted some military sites in central and southern areas of Syria. For now, at least, Iranian media is playing down the impact. The true nature of what has happened is only likely to trickle out bit by bit from the Iranian authorities. Israel may move more quickly to disclose the details of its attack, but that may depend on whether or not it plans to carry out another wave. It seems as if Israel, for the time being, has declared this operation complete, but we'll see. The Pentagon has given a briefing that the U.S. was made aware of Israel's plans beforehand. Of course, they jointly planned this, and everything Israel does is facilitated by the U.S. And they claim there was no U.S. involvement in the operation, but that is obviously untrue. For now, On the scant evidence that is available, Israel may have heeded Washington's warnings and reined in some of its more ambitious plans to cause maximum pain to the Iranian authorities. So this plan, these more ambitious plans to cause maximum pain to the Iranian authorities is actually limited by the physical means Israel has available to it to attack Iran 1,000+ kilometers away. The need to use huge numbers of military warplanes and these air-launched missiles that they don't have infinite numbers of. The limited impact that these missiles have. Again, remember, Russia is launching over 4,000 missiles at targets all across Ukraine every single year. Over 8,000 at this point. And Ukraine is still hanging in there. The conflict has not ended in favor of Russia. So how many missiles do you think Israel has available to launch attacks like this? How often do you think they can do that? And remember that Iran actually has the ability to retaliate with its very large, some say over 3,000 strong ballistic missile arsenal. Let's see what the Israeli media said. This was, there are some differences here, but also some similarities. Times of Israel. Israel launches precise strikes on Iran military sites weeks after missile attack. After reports of explosions near Tehran began to emerge around 2:15 a.m. local time, the Israeli Defense Force released a statement confirming that it was attacking Iran in response to months of continuous attacks from the regime in Iran against the state of Israel. The strikes were carried out in several waves over the course of several hours in various areas. Or again, Iran attacking Israel. Or was it Iran responding to constant Israeli provocations? The article also says, after announcing the aircraft safely returned to Israel, the military dubbed the mission Days of Repentance. It said dozens of Israeli Air Force aircraft, including fighter jets, refuelers, and spy planes, participated in the complex operation some 1,600 kilometers from Israel. The IDF said that among the military sites targeted were air defense batteries and ballistic missile manufacturing sites. Those used in direct Iran's latest attack on Israel on October 1st and an earlier attack on April 14th. Additionally, the military said the strikes gave the IAF wider freedom of aerial action in Iran and that it had a wide bank of targets that it can hit in future operations if required. And the way all of that is worded makes it sound like this was very limited and that Israel is threatening wider, more significant attacks for the future. It also said Iran claimed its air defense systems successfully countered the attacks, but that limited damage was caused to some locations. In a statement, the Iranian air defense said Israel attacked military targets in the provinces of Tehran, Khuzestan, and Ilyam. The loud blasts heard around Tehran were related to the activation of air defense systems against the actions of Zionist regime, which attacked 3 locations outside of Tehran city, state TV reported, citing officials of the Tehran province air defense. I think these newspapers need to get better editors. An Israeli source told the Ynet News that the Iranian claim was a lie. It was a total failure. There were 0 interceptions. But I have to be honest, I don't take Israeli or Iranian claims regarding this type of development seriously. I won't, and I will wait for additional evidence before I draw any conclusions. This is what the article, the Israeli Times of Israel article concludes by claiming, if the regime in Iran were to make the mistake of beginning a new round of escalation, we will be obliged to respond. He continued, our message is clear. All those who threaten the state of Israel and seek to drag the region into wider escalation will pay a heavy price. We demonstrated today that we have both the capability and the resolve to act decisively, and we are prepared on offense and defense to defend the state of Israel and the people of Israel, Hagari added. So this is Daniel Hagari, the IDF spokesman. Again, absolutely absurd to claim that Iran is dragging the region into war. It is the US, who has been waging war across the region for decades, is illegally occupied the region for decades, is backing Israel militarily, enabling absolutely everything Israel does, again, for decades, since its creation, really. And it was Israel, following October 7, 2023, using that attack as a pretext to strike at Hezbollah, to strike at Iran, who admittedly had nothing to do with the October 7, 2023 attack. So we have to keep all of this in mind, because they will constantly repeat these claims until people accept it as fact, but only if you ignore what actually has happened over the last year or so. Now, what about Iranian media? What did they say? Again, very similar to what the Times of Israel article said. Israel targeted positions in Tehran, Khuzestan, Ilam, causing limited damage. Iran. Okay, and then they talk about the country's integrated air defense system successfully intercepted and countered the act of aggression. The attacks caused limited damage in some locations, and the dimensions of the incident are under investigation, the statement added. So if you look at the Western media, Israeli media, Iranian media, you add it all together, it sounds like there was a limited attack on Iran. Missiles did get through and cause damage, but this was not a crippling attack by Israel. It was limited, almost certainly to avoid Iranian retaliation. And the irony here is that Israel knows that if it conducts a very limited strike on Iran, because Iran is exercising maximum restraint, there is a high likelihood that they will not retaliate. That is the irony here, that Iran is painted out as this threat to regional security, when you see Israel taking advantage of the fact that Iran is actually so restrained in its actions, even when attacked within its own borders by Israel. Now, as all of this takes place, I'm describing the limited military capabilities the collective West has. I'm pointing out that these plans, all the way back in 2009, were acknowledging a shift in the balance of military and economic power, not just in the Middle East, but across the world. They realized that time was running out for the US to reassert primacy over these different regions of the world: Europe, the Middle East, Asia Pacific. And they were scrambling to do this, even as the military capabilities of, say, Russia, Iran, and China continued to grow very quickly relative to the collective West military power, which includes Israel. Israel has a very limited capability to strike at Iran. So even if they carried out the largest scale airstrike they could with conventional weapons, it would still be relatively limited. It would not cause the wide-scale damage that people imagine it would on Iran. And then if it did cause somewhat significant damage to, say, oil refineries or their nuclear program, they would retaliate. And we have already seen the impact of Iranian retaliation with its ballistic missile arsenal. So this is a demonstration of the actual balance of military power in the region versus the imagined balance of military power. Many people in the West still refer back to the US invasion of Iraq, the demonstration of US military power over the Iraqis, and they imagine that is how it applies to the whole rest of the region, up to and including today. And it does not. It has shifted significantly. And Israeli military power versus Iran and its allies, including Hezbollah, that has shifted significantly. We remember the 2006 Israeli-Lebanon war, Israeli forces invading southern Lebanon and being ejected by Hezbollah. Well, as this missile attack took place and as these tensions continue to grow, the Western media itself is admitting how difficult things are on the ground for Israeli forces in southern Lebanon. This is from the Washington Post. This was from October 24th, so relatively recently. Hezbollah proving a formidable foe against Israeli forces in Lebanon. And all this article is going to tell you, I'm going to read significant parts of it, but it's going to tell you that Hezbollah is outfighting Israel, and that the likelihood of Israel getting the upper hand is is very unlikely. And essentially what this article is explaining is that we're watching a repeat of 2006 all over again. So after a series of staggering losses, Hezbollah is putting up a stiff fight against Israeli forces in Lebanon south while continuing to rain down rockets across the border, underscoring the group's resilience and the limitations of Israel's ground campaign. And I told people after the assassination of Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah that there's continuity of leadership in Hezbollah. It's also a very highly decentralized organization. Taking out the leadership is not going to stop it from being an effective resistance organization. And now we have the Washington Post itself admitting this and citing Israeli sources as well in the process. When Israel sent troops across the border on October 1st, officials estimated military operations would last for a few weeks. More than 3 weeks later, officials have said they will likely need a few weeks longer, raising concerns over the kind of mission creep that has defined Israel's past wars in Lebanon. I would say unsuccessful wars in Lebanon. The militant group has bounced back from its unprecedented setbacks, including the penetration of its electronic devices and the assassination of most of its senior leadership. This is not unprecedented, though, by the way. This has been something that Hezbollah has faced many times over its history, stretching all the way back to its creation. Thanks to flexible command structure, help from Iran, and years of planning for an Israeli invasion, current and former Lebanese officials said. Israeli officials, for their part, contend that the group remains significantly weakened and operations on the ground in Lebanon are going according to plan. Take that for what it's worth. It also says they are a formidable foe, said an official with the Israeli Defense Forces, one of 4 Israeli security officials who spoke with the Post, the Washington Post, about the state of the fight in Lebanon. The official said Hezbollah militants are better trained, more experienced after fighting in Syria, and armed with more advanced weaponry than in 2006 during their last war with Israel, which Hezbollah won. I'm adding that in. They don't really talk about how it ended in 2006. Former and current Lebanese officials say the group has regained its footing in large part because it is operating on familiar turf in the south where it can execute guerrilla-style attacks. Hezbollah operatives are using the rugged hillsides and steep valleys to their advantage, the official said, which Israel is trying to counteract with clearing operations, demolishing homes, tunnels, bunkers, and raising vegetation as their forces advance. Hezbollah's ground forces also maintain independent command structure and communication networks, according to Lebanese officials. That system insulated frontline fighters and commanders from the pager attacks last month that left many senior and mid-ranking Hezbollah members in Beirut unable to pass even simple messages to each other. And again, I had referred to the pager attack as a terrorist attack because they were attacking Hezbollah's civilian administration, not the militant organization, the civilian administration. And that includes medical workers, people who clean the streets, and people who just help take care of the day-to-day lives of Lebanese civilians. So just keep that in mind, and this is what the Washington Post now is confirming. When it talks about Iran's role, Iran, Hezbollah's main patron, has stepped up its support of the group over the last month, sending additional supplies, munitions, and personnel to Lebanon through Syria, said a Lebanese official from a Shia party aligned with Hezbollah. Iranian support for Hezbollah on the battlefield has intensified, the official said, pointing to a notable increase in on-the-ground advisors. He emphasized that Iran was not directly participating in the fighting. Israeli commanders remain bullish on the war's outlook, saying they have already managed to destroy a large portion of the group's arsenal and are well on their way to dramatically degrading the group's military capabilities. But if you sat through the 2006 war, you would have remembered Israel making the exact same claims. Yet Hezbollah's rockets and drone barrages toward Israel have actually increased over the last 3 weeks, from about 100 projectiles a day at the start of the ground operation to about 150 in recent days, according to IDF statements. Then the Washington Post reveals a very, I would say, unsurprising contradiction. First, it says Israel continues to describe its invasion of Lebanon as limited, aimed at allowing tens of thousands of displaced residents to return to their homes in the north and to protect them from the kind of devastating cross-border attack that Hamas launched from Gaza last October. Hezbollah has never carried out an attack like that. They do not carry out terrorist attacks. They only ever fight the Israeli military. That is what makes them entirely different than Hamas. But then the Washington Post also says, and they're citing an IDF official. He says, "We've been surprised that we are operating in southern Lebanon and that our people's routines in Haifa and Tel Aviv have not been disrupted." That's not what we expected. So they say we need to invade southern Lebanon because people in northern Israel cannot go about their daily lives. They're under threat by Hezbollah. But then they're admitting that as they operate in southern Lebanon, people because Haifa is in northern Israel, these people are going about their daily routines, which have not been disrupted. So which is it? And what the Washington Post is admitting is that, again, Israel is creating a false pretext to justify its invasion of southern Lebanon. Israel is fighting U.S. adversaries in the region as a U.S. proxy. They're creating pretexts under which to do so, but primarily that is what they're doing. Just like Ukraine is fighting U.S. adversaries in Russia, that is what Israel is doing in the Middle East for the U.S. against Iran and its allies, including Hezbollah. Ultimately, the U.S. is pursuing primacy over the Middle East, just as it does over Europe and the Asia-Pacific region. But it is unsustainable, it is unobtainable. And the longer they continue trying to pursue it along with their proxies, including Israel, the fewer and fewer options they're going to have left that are actually viable. And those options are going to become increasingly desperate and therefore dangerous. And this includes the use of nuclear weapons. And I believe the greatest danger in the Middle East is the fact that Israel does have nuclear weapons. It's not just the US that has nuclear weapons. Israel also has nuclear weapons. And the US has been investing a lot recently to portray Israel as, yes, a great ally of the United States, but also a nation that oftentimes does not listen at all to the United States before doing something rash. So that is my great fear, that the US is going to use Israel to attack Iran in a way that right now the collective West's conventional military power is incapable of, because they are so desperate to reverse this process that is taking place in the Middle East and around the world that is displacing US primacy and replacing it with multipolarism. So we're going to have to keep a very close eye on all of this. This was the immediate aftermath of this Israeli strike on Iran. We have to wait and see what Iran does. I suspect that they will continue exercising maximum restraint, but we never know. We'll have to keep a very close eye on this. I will keep a close eye on this. Until then, if you thought this video was useful, please like and share. Think about subscribing. It's free to do. It helps the channel grow. Check out the video description below for other places you can find and follow my work. On my YouTube channel, you will notice there is a home tab, a video tab, a live tab, playlists, community, and also a search function. You need to click on videos to see my videos, my most recent videos. You have to make sure that they're displayed with the latest first to see what my latest videos are. My community tab shows additional information that I post, including links to articles and other videos other people post that I want to share. And the search option allows you to search just my channel. So if you see I'm doing a lot of videos about Ukraine and the Middle East, and you're wondering what's happening in Myanmar, just type in Myanmar, hit enter, and you'll see all of these videos that I have done in the past about Myanmar. And you can catch up on everything that I've said until my next update on that topic. I also have backed up all of my videos on Rumble. So please follow me on Rumble in case YouTube deletes my channel. All of my videos are backed up there. I'm also on Telegram and on X. Again, the links to all of that will be in the video description below. In the video description below are also all of the links to everything that I reference in the video, as well as for ways you can help support my work. I do not monetize any of my social media platforms, not YouTube, not Rumble, not X. If ads pop up, feel free to skip them because they're not helping me out at all. If you do want to help support my work, please do so through Buy Me a Coffee and also through Patreon. To everyone who has been, whether it's a one-time donation, donations month to month, or if you have no additional resources and you're just sharing my work with other people, getting the word out there, that is all greatly appreciated. That is what helps me continue doing this work. So thank you. And as always, thank you for watching.